Alright, Shabbat Shalom, October 15, 2016. This is your lock. Another lesson in the New Testament is Fake series. This lesson is looking at some of the history with the high priests being set up by Rome. If you don't know the history of what was going on surrounding the time of the New Testament and Jesus coming into the picture and the New Testament being created and so on, you don't have enough understanding of what really happened at that time, so you need to do some more studying. Just looking at some history with the high priest, what I'm going to show here now is this particular high priest, which is mentioned in the New Testament, is showing up in history as having been put up by the Roman government, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the Most High chose Aaron and his line to be the priests from way back in the days of Moses, right? And they had special clothes to wear and special things they had to do and so on. They were consecrated for this. They were anointed for this. Now, the Roman governors are actually putting in the high priests in the temple. They're installing these high priests, and they're basically running the show. So how is it that the Roman government is installing your set-apart priests unto the Most High? How is it? Is it any wonder that there's so much problems with the New Testament and that the supposed salvation that Jesus brought is causing so much salvation today? Because the priests were being set up by Rome. So it was nothing that was before the Most High that was proper. Now, if you look at the salvation that the Most High offered and the blessings and protection that the Most High offered in the Old Testament, it happened differently. There's no confusion there. No one wonders if the Most High sent this salvation or that salvation, meaning this time of deliverance from this or that nation for Israel. No, because it was clear that they were doing things the way the Most High said. And so they got their salvation and deliverance and so on at different times from enemy nations. But their problem was that they would enter into transgressions again. And so they would go back in the same kind of captivity and being under the power of other rulers from other nations. But when they straightened up and started to walk right again and call on the Most High, their salvation returned. And their blessings returned, the food, crop, and so on, right? So there's no confusion there. We just know that they kept falling because they weren't walking right all the time. But with Jesus, you wonder, this salvation that he brings is so different that it's not a salvation designed for Israel, but it's a salvation designed for the whole world that wants it. Because you got Gentiles who are saying they came for them, or at least he came for the whole world. And they claim Jesus as theirs. And they're using the same New Testament as the Hebrews say is ours. Yet it's the Romans who have their hands in the creation of it. And also the Romans who have their hands in setting up the actual high priests. Nobody's saying these Roman governors sought the Most High and heard from the Most High and he told them to select this particular high priest and set him up and so on. And that the Romans would consecrate these high priests or even, So here now if you look, like about 6 to 15 AD. Looking at this Bible timeline here, it's saying Annas, son of Sethi, you might sometimes see Seth, is high priest. He's the first high priest appointed by the Roman governor of Syria. Again, a Roman governor. Then you got now 15 to 26 AD, Valerius Gratus is Roman governor of Judea. Then 15 to 16 AD, Ismail, son of Phaeabi, is appointed high priest by Gratus. Right? Gratus, like I just mentioned, is the Roman governor of Judea. So here is another high priest being installed by Rome. So you're getting the understanding here that Rome is the one controlling how everything flows in the New Testament. Because just like they wrote the New Testament, put it together, they are setting up the whole construct and the whole backdrop and setting and atmosphere that surrounds everything that goes on in the New Testament, down to the very placing and installation of the high priests. I mean, for someone to continue to deny that these things are true that I've been bringing out about the New Testament, only to add to those who have been teaching these things already, it's really a problem for me to see how they can continue in that vein when you're seeing in history that the Roman government were controlling the temple. The Roman government, Gentiles, were controlling the temple and even deciding who would be high priest. Right? So the Most High has nothing to do with the selection of these people, nothing to do, right? And even if you want to say, but they were still priests of Israel, then why is it that there was no blessing to Israel from them being installed? If the Romans were taking real priests and putting them up in the temple as high priests, why didn't, and that was good and they were really priests, why didn't a blessing come from that? If the Most High was still respecting their selection to the priesthood as high priests, why wasn't there a blessing? Because the Most High wasn't in it. It wasn't in it. If there was a blessing, then they wouldn't have been running from the Romans in AD 70, right? There was no blessing. They even killed the so-called Son of God. Is that a blessing? To remove your sin and forgive your transgressions? When Israel's transgressions were removed in the Old Testament, they were usually blessed. Now Jesus dies on the cross to remove the transgressions of Israel and did a double job by dying at the same time for the whole world, they say. And instead of a blessing from your transgressions being removed, you're now running from the Romans because you're slaughtered in AD 70. So Ishmael is another high priest that was put up by another Roman governor of Judea. Then in 16 to 17 AD, Eleazar, son of Annas, is appointed high priest by Gratus. So that Annas has started with, now his son is also put up by Gratus. And then in 17 to 18, see, they're changing out these high priests real fast. Simon, son of Camithus, is appointed high priest by Gratus. They're just going through these different priests like it's not a thing, right? They're not consulting the Most High. These Roman governors are just putting in anyone. It's just straight politics. Straight politics. And you got Israelites today saying, oh, it's cool, man, this is the Most High. No, this is not the Most High, all these things leading up to the New Testament, and these priests are sometimes mentioned in the New Testament. This isn't the doing of the Most High writing this stuff in the New Testament. This is the Roman government building a New Testament based on the things that they did and the stories that they made up and some of the truthful things that they did by installing some of these priests on their own, where the God of Israel had nothing to do with this and no blessing would come from it because they would later be slaughtered, running in AD 70 from the same Romans who were controlling the priesthood, controlling the temple, and putting up their own priests in the temple that they selected, right? So you got 17 to 18 AD, Simon, son of Camithus, appointed by high priest. 18 to 36 AD, Joseph Caiaphas, the son-in-law of Annas, is appointed high priest by Gratus. And then it goes on saying in 20 AD, Saul of Tarsus comes to Jerusalem to study with the great Rabbi Gamaliel. That's Acts 22 verse 3. So you got all these different kind of high priests being installed, not in a respected way according to how it was done in the Old Testament, but being done according to whatever whimsical strategy the Roman government felt. So now if we look here from Bible History Online at, I think it's bible-history.com, under the heading Annas the High Priest, which I mentioned was put in by a Roman governor. Alright, they say here now, Annas, whose name means the grace of Jehovah, was the son of Seth, which I said before was also known as Sethi, and appointed high priest of the Jews in 6 AD, in his 37th year. He was high priest from 6 to 15 AD, but as long as he lived, he was the virtual head of the priestly party in Jerusalem. He was, and you got to think too, that when Rome is putting in these high priests, they would have to do what Rome wanted. The Roman government is not going to put in some religious leader, because the high priest is basically like a religious leader for Israel. So Rome is going to put in the ones as high priests that they feel will do Rome's bidding. So you see how they control the whole creation of the New Testament? Because whoever they're working with is going to be doing what they want, doing what the heathen wants, right? But as long as he lived, he was the virtual head of the priestly party in Rome. In Jerusalem, he was chosen to the high priesthood by Quirinius, the imperial governor of Syria, obliged to give way to Ismail by Valerius Gratus, procurator of Judea, in the beginning of Tiberius's reign in 14 AD. So these high priests, when they get in, they're going to be doing whatever Rome wants, and they shift out of the picture to give way to another high priest that Rome wants to set in, that Rome was working with, and so on, right? I mean, whenever these high priests start, siding with their people and so on and whatever, they were either killed or just removed from office, and then Rome would install another one, because the Most High wasn't installing these priests. It was the heathen nation Rome that was doing it. Eleazar the son of Annas followed Ismail, then Simon, then Joseph Caiaphas, son-in-law of Annas, and you can read that in John chapter 18 and verse 13. In the time of Christ,
high priests were appointed and removed at the command of the Roman governors.
In the time of Christ, high priests were appointed and removed at the command of the Roman governors. You hear that? High priests were appointed and removed at the command of the Roman governors. So you get Christ, the so-called great high priest, is coming and seeing his other lesser high priests of the nation of Israel being appointed and removed at will by the political strategy of Rome. And this Christ, the great high priest, the greatest priest of all, they say, can't do a thing about how his priests are treated. Doesn't that sound funny to you about this New Testament? The greatest high priest of all that we've all waited for, with their tav and whatever they want to say from the Garden of Eden prophecy. And when he shows up, the Romans are still ruling over his priests, his lesser priests. So basically the great high priest just stands by, waiting for the cross, waiting for his demise, while his other lower priests under him, that he was watching over from he was in heaven before he came into Mary's body, he just sees all his high priests being manhandled by Rome, and that is fine. So it goes on, although removed from office, Annas, the high priest, well-respected high priest as well, his power and influence was so great that 5 of his sons, as well as his son-in-law Caiaphas and his grandson Matthias, also became high priests. Years afterward, he lost the high priesthood, but even then he was popularly considered as still being in office and was still called high priest. Even after Pentecost, his name appears first in the list of priestly leaders. Acts chapter 4 verse 5 to 7 says, "And it came to pass on the next day that their rulers, elders, and scribes, as well as Annas the high priest, Caiaphas, John, and Alexander, and as many as were of the family of the high priest, were gathered together at Jerusalem." Now, why would Israelites at that point be so happy about these high priests being gathered there, especially Annas, when their priesthood is governed and controlled by Rome? Because no Israelite is going to understand how Rome is ruling the high priesthood of the nation of Israel, and they're supposed to get salvation based on what these high priests are doing. Does that ring a bell to you? You see, you can try to tell me all you want that this Jesus is real and his sacrifice is real and so on. Now, I don't believe he even lived, but I can give you that if you want, right? But at least, how is his sacrifice going to be really worth anything if the priesthood that he is in is corrupted by Rome having their hand all in it, all over it? And so the mind of those who believe in this Christus is just like based on the status that Jesus had, being the actual Son of God. None of that matters because he's the Son of God. Well, if the priesthood is corrupt, then everyone in the priesthood has been touched by that corruption. Well, if the priesthood is corrupt, then everyone in the priesthood has been touched by that corruption, or at least is limited by it. So if you want to say Jesus cannot be corrupted just because something went wrong with the priesthood, then his status or his power to do what he's doing is limited because the priesthood itself has not been restored. Limited because the priesthood itself has not been restored. How can he die to restore a priesthood and a people with a priesthood system that itself needs to be repaired and taken out of the hands of heathen before he uses it to restore his people? You notice when you read places like in the book of Jeremiah chapter 30 and 31 and like Joel chapter 3, it tells you that when the Most High delivers us, certain things are going to change because what? Why? He's going to take us away. And even Isaiah chapter 11 is telling you that before certain changes happen to us, he's going to gather us and remove us from the heathen, right? So basically, he's purifying us by removing us from the heathen, from under their power. And then corn and wine is going to start to flow and so on, right? And we're going to be blessed and things are going to just be restored and whatever. He removes us from them to purify us, and then these things start to happen. And then later on now, Israel becomes the light to the nation after we have been purified by being separated from the nations, and the law will go forth from Jerusalem after we have been removed from among the heathen, and now the heathen, because we're no longer among them, has to come to Jerusalem. Micah 4 verse 2, Isaiah 2 and 3. Right? The heathen has to come to us because we've been removed from them, which is a part of our purification process. Because remember, there are enough scriptures that show that the Most High is going to lock us into our corruption that we brought upon ourselves, our forefathers choosing certain things of certain ways of the heathen. He's going to lock us into that corruption for a long time by scattering us among the heathen, and even there among the heathen in these strange lands, we will even eat corrupt food. So our corruption is locked in by being among heathen. So if the heathen is controlling the priesthood in Rome by Roman governors doing whatever they want with the priesthood, how can Jesus, the great high priest, come and offer a pure sacrifice that's in the hand of where the priesthood is in the hand of the heathen? That's why I made that video a long time ago about the sacrifice. What did I call it again? Calvary is not kosher, to show that the Roman high priests were all over the sacrifice of Calvary. So if the sacrifice is either fake or it is not accepted by the Most High. You got to think. Too much, we're so involved in just believing, because this whole Jesus thing with the New Testament causes you to believe instead of think. And so my videos are just trying to get people to think in a common sense kind of way. So if I go on now, in John chapter 18 verse 19 and 22, the high priest is undoubtedly Annas. Although in verse 13 and 24, Caiaphas is mentioned as the high priest. Annas is referred to in connection with the beginning of John the Baptist's ministry, which took place in the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. So basically, John the Baptist, who was the one who, the forerunner of Jesus, or whatever the term they used to call him, who announced Jesus' presence, his ministry begins in a high priesthood system that was controlled by the heathen. Luke chapter 3 and verse 2 is where you'll find that, right? As though father and son-in-law were joint holders of the office, right? Of the office that was being controlled by the heathen Roman governors. It seems clear that due to his ability and force of character, he was virtually a high priest, although Caiaphas had the title. When Jesus was arrested, he was first brought before Annas, right? And see who they brought him to? Somebody who was controlled by Rome. And that's in John 18 and verse 13. It was apparently Annas who questioned him about his disciples and his teaching. And he's going to be asking questions that's going to be along the lines of what Rome really can deal with, right? In order to take him down. And so basically at every point, Jesus is being cornered and controlled by Rome, right? They're not letting him get away. And you call that a blessing that he came? If somebody's killing your Messiah when he shows up, is that a blessing? If Rambo went to save people in Vietnam or wherever they were in the movie, is that a blessing to those soldiers, those POWs who are locked up in those prisons, in those cages? Is that a blessing when their Messiah, Rambo, is captured and killed? Or is it a blessing that he came and delivered them or got them out? He was able to rescue them. Even though he got captured, at least he broke out. So you're telling me even a Messiah to POWs found it necessary with human strength and with his training, military training, to break out in order to be the Messiah to the prisoners of war. But Jesus doesn't break out of anything. He's led to slaughter, to be killed. When I read stories about messiahs in history or in the Bible, messiahs get the job done. They do not get slaughtered and then their people say he was a great Messiah because he delivered us. No, messiahs deliver. Messiahs don't just die while their people continue to be in the same condition. No one can prove to me or to anyone that after the Messiah Jesus died, that his people the same year were free or changed or restored, or corn and wine was flowing for them, or they were rid of their oppressors, the Romans. No one can prove that because it never happened. They lived for another 3 or 4 decades after that, after Christus died, in the same condition under the Romans, which actually eventually got worse, and they had to run from them in AD 70. This Messiah did not do what other Messiahs did. That's all I'm trying to say, right? Alright, so I'll stop right there. So, yeah, take a look at that, this whole thing of the different high priests that were set up by the Roman governors, right? And you decide, really, in a common sense kind of way, what sense it makes to you. You decide, and then tie that in with the whole New Testament, and then look again at what the Old Testament actually teaches and see if you still want to believe in this Jesus and New Testament.